Hi, my name's Elisa Foster. I'm a mom of two, one with extra special needs. Welcome to my podcast, Happy and Independent, where I share weekly conversations with my network of parents, professionals, and experts from around the world. So let's change the world, one empowered, confident advocate at a time. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Happy and Independent with Elisa Foster. Today, I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend, Dani Forbes. She's the Executive Director of National Service Dogs, which happens to be the organization that my son, Andy, has a dog. Hi, Dani. How are you?
Good morning.
You want to tell everybody a little bit about your background?
So I am one of the co-founders of National Service Dogs. We started back in 1996, and prior to that, I was actually training dogs for the deaf and hard of hearing.
So this area is your expertise, shall we say?
For the last 25, almost 26 years, yeah.
And National Service Dogs, you actually support all of Canada, is that correct?
Yeah, we're a national program. So we have dogs from Newfoundland to Victoria.
Amazing. And do you get government funding?
There is no government funding.
That's right.
We squeak out a little money from Trillium through the OLG and whatnot, but there's no funding for any service dog providers or guide dog providers in Canada.
Amazing. And how, well, not amazing in a good way, but amazing that these organizations can still exist. Do families actually have to pay for their dogs?
For our program, there's a small application fee and some equipment fees. But no, you're not actually paying for the dog or the ongoing support services over the 8-year working life of the dog. But you do have to pay for the cost of coming to team training. We're not at a point where we're providing those services at no charge. So for families coming from out west, it is a little bit more money than local families. But there's the cost to us over the 10-year life of the dog is about $40,000 these days, and we don't pass that cost on to the families.
And you do that through a lot of fundraising with
We do
private.
a ton of fundraising. Yeah, we do a ton of fundraising. We have corporate partners. We're lucky enough this Christmas to be the charity of choice for Canada Life Insurance. So they gave $50,000, and a good chunk of that's going to our autism program. So between foundations, corporations, and private individuals, we're able to fund our program. We raise about $1 million a year.
Amazing. Let's talk about the different programs that you have. So Andy has an autism service dog, but that is not the only type of dog that you guys train.
No. When we started back in 1996, there was no such thing as an autism service dog. We didn't know that at the time, but we found out within a few years that what we were doing was groundbreaking within our industry. And the service dog model that we were developing for autism now is the worldwide model for autism service dogs. And so that's our claim to fame within the service dog community. When we started, myself and my fellow co-founders were training dogs for deaf and people with seizure disorder or people in wheelchairs needing physical support. And when we first started NSD, we tried to be all things to all people. But as word of what we were doing in the autism community started to grow, we got inundated. We got requests for dogs from Iceland, Australia, UK, all over North America. And we streamlined it and just did what we were known for, which was the Autism Service Dog Program. And it stayed that way until 2010. And we were releasing dogs and donating them to other guide and service dog programs that weren't suitable for autism. So we try to allow our dogs to choose their career path, I guess is a good way of putting it.
Because not every dog is meant to be an autism dog.
That's right. And not every dog's meant to be a guide dog for the blind or a seizure response dog. So we were losing dogs to other programs who were turning them into those really awesome guide and service dogs in other areas of work. And our return on investment, I know it sounds
no,
widgety to talk about
you
dogs
can be,
that way.
No,
it's right.
but you can be a charity. You're a charity, but you're a business as well, in the fact that you need to stay in business so that you can continue helping people. This is not about making a profit. It's about allowing yourself to be sustainable. So you're investing in these dogs, you're training in them
for 2 years,
and then your people aren't even getting the benefits.
That's right. So it's a 2-year process to prepare a dog to go out to a family. So that's a lot. It costs us $40,000. That's front end loaded. So about 20 to 25,000 of that comes in the first 2 years. So we were looking at ways to get a better return on investment, and we started researching in the States. Dogs for veterans with post-traumatic stress was being developed, and we did a lot of research in 2010 and found out that there were no assistance dogs international accredited programs in Canada even interested in moving into the psychiatric service dog field, because that's what it was being called. And their reaction to the whole PTSD service dog thing was the same as autism back in 1998, 99, 2000, when we first came on the scene with the international community. They didn't see how the dogs could work. Are they real service dogs versus not? But for us, we pushed through all that with autism. So we'd lived that before, and the doubting that the dogs would have a benefit that was actually relatable, and what tasks do you train them to do?
And life-changing.
Yeah. There was a lot of skepticism in the early days, both for the autism and the PTSD programs going back.
So you actually have 4 programs that you... Yeah. So you have autism service dogs. PTSD.
Canine-assisted intervention.
And what is that?
Those dogs are a collective of services. So our first canine-assisted intervention dogs worked in the school system. Mm-hmm. So we matched dogs with social workers, and they were attached to school boards, and they used the dogs as part of their mental health programs within schools. So the dogs would be brought in to help kids with behavioral issues, kids that were, being impacted by bullying, helping to re-engage them in school and keep them in the classroom and make them available for learning. They were also used as part of critical incident situations. So an example of that is one of our first canine-assisted intervention teams, we call them facility dogs, went out into Western Ontario, and actually, my golden retriever, it was one of her puppies, Holly, that went out, and a little boy had lost his dad over Christmas. He was like 7 and was having trouble integrating back into school in January and communicating what was going on for him. And they used the dogs as a bridge to communicate. So he was able to, and with the help of the dog, talk to his classmates about how he was feeling and why he'd missed so much school and what was going on with his family. And it just gave him that support. But these days, the bulk of our canine-assisted interventions program is working with victim services. So we have dogs in courthouse environment. So the dogs are supporting kids that are testifying in court.
I remember one of my first exposure that was even an option was an article out in Calgary. Mm-hmm. And it was 2 little girls that had to testify in court unfortunately, for family sexual abuse. Yep. And it was a picture of the 2 of them wearing superhero capes from behind. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yep. And the dog in the middle and their arms around the dog. And the dog allowed them to be able to share their story in court and change their experience.
Yeah. Pacific Assistance Dogs out in BC has placed the first accredited facility dogs in Canada over a decade ago. So Caber was their first dog with police services in Vancouver. And he just retired, but they've gone on to place numerous. So we modeled our program after what they were doing. And today we have dogs a couple of dogs in London, Toronto, police services in Cornwall, Kingston, Ottawa. And those dogs not only work with victim services, but they work as peer support for the officers to help mitigate the risk of PTSD.
They were, well, because they see the worst of the worst. And I have 14 years in the police service industry, and I totally understand that because I still have those moments. And it's incredible what it's doing to change because we need to care for our people. And then finally, you also have companion dogs. What are companion dogs?
So our companion dog program goes back to that whole return on investment piece. So again, in the early days, if we had dogs that didn't make it through the program and weren't suitable to go out to other programs to be career pathed into another service or guide dog program, we were just releasing them as pets. And we also used to breed purebred Goldens pretty consistently, and they're pretty soft. They're awesome, but they're pretty soft, and they don't always have the confidence to be service dogs, but they're well behaved, great obedience. So rather than releasing them outright, we started identifying families with special needs, whether it was older children with autism, kids with Down syndrome. We've placed dogs with families with kids with Angelman syndrome, CP, cerebral palsy in various stages, and other global developmental issues or needs. FASD, we've had some kids with FASD, which is fetal alcohol syndrome. And the dogs don't wear service dog jackets. They don't go to school. They don't go out in public, but they provide that emotional support piece. So when the kids come home from school, they have a best friend. The dogs do have some tasks on them because they're trained to do visits and provide deep pressure and engage the kids. So it'd be almost like a skilled companion dog. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, because they still have an expertise, but they're not meant. And I think this is where there's a confusion about dogs, because let's talk a little bit about the policies in Canada about. So, there's not wonderful policies across Canada as far as what
it's a patchwork, right?
Yes.
Every province has a different
It's not
process.
equal. It's not the same, I should say, not equal, but it's not consistent across the country, which is something that I know you advocate for.
Yes.
And that you're working towards. And that's where we get a lot of confusion. And unfortunately, it sounds awful, and it's something I never even believed existed before we had a service dog. People order vests off the internet and try to pass their pets as a service dog. And I'm not really sure why they think that's okay, but I know that we spot it all the time now that we have a different viewpoint. Yeah. And it's difficult because we know what our dog does for our son and our family. And I would hope that they would try and respect that. But it's a difficulty. Do we have any idea of whether that's going to change, whether we're going to start to see policy come across?
I honestly don't know. I'm a bit jaded on that because I just co-chaired the committee up in Ottawa for 3 years that was trying to get a national standard for service dogs in place. And in the 11th hour, it fell through due to, let's say, special interest groups. But it's needed. I think the challenge is with people. I see two sides of it. People who are putting fake service dog jackets on their dogs, as well-meaning as they are. I mean, I get that some folks have for themselves an emotional benefit to having their dog with them. Some of them just do it because they don't want to fly and have to pay to cargo their dog out, and they can do it for free with a fake jacket. Though those rules are changing. The airline industry, we're actively working through ADI with the transportation agency in the States, which will impact Canada on regulations because of safety issues. And that's, I think, the double-edged sword, because some folks are putting jackets on dogs that are not safe. And
absolutely
putting the public at risk. And as we sit here in Ontario, there's no recourse for business owners. So if you have a dog come into your establishment and the person, it's a service dog, they have a doctor's note verifying they need the dog to mitigate and support their disability. Legally, they have a right to access with the dog as long as that note is in their pocket, regardless of the dog. Like, if the dog's misbehaving, you can ask them to leave, but you run the risk of being on the front page of the newspaper the next day. And those risks are real because the news media doesn't always delve into the story to find out the truth. And we get calls from businesses all the time. What are my rights? What can I do? And our answer is always the same. If the dog's misbehaving, get it on video. So it's not your word against theirs. But there's no recourse. There's nothing in the Ontarians with Disabilities Act to support businesses in trying to figure out what's legit, what's not. So they let a lot of things slide because of fear and a lack of
And I think
regulation.
Sometimes if we talk about families of kids with special needs, because right now the wait lists in Canada for a service dog, most of them are closed.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And there's definitely, I know we waited almost 4 years once we were on the wait list. It was worth every minute, and I am so grateful that we didn't try and go another shortcut route. It was so worth it, just the support and the type of dog and the knowledge we were given. But I think families are so desperate to get support and to get help, and they maybe don't understand the full long-term concerns when you have a dog that is not an official service dog that's supporting their child.
Well, and like I said, here in Ontario, all you need is a doctor's note. And, but that doesn't mean you have a dog that's actually helping you. And I've seen situations where somebody's had that doctor note in their pocket and forget about them needing the dog and the dog's behavior. The dogs are terrified. I was at an event, a very large event, and somebody come up to me and said, "Can you come and help us? We're trying to mitigate a situation." And this woman had a lovely little German Shepherd cross puppy. She was only 8 months old. And the dog was behaving in a way that was threatening to people. And she was terrified. And I tried to explain to the lady that she kept saying, "Well, the dog's just protecting me." I said, "No, you're actually harming her. Your dog is under so much stress right now. She's not coping in this environment. The best thing you could do for her is to remove her from the crowd." But she wasn't able to see that her dog was in distress. Well, she misread all of those cues.
The dog is 8 months old.
And it was a terrified puppy.
Yeah, it's a baby.
Who was, backed into literally a corner and was reacting. But this lady, as well-meaning as she was, "Well, I need the dog for me." That's fine, but you're hurting your dog right now. And you see that as much as people who have a dog who's just maybe out of control, not dangerous per se, but just not well behaved. But there's no self-awareness around some of those situations. And they don't get the same training as you did.
No.
We spent a lot of time talking to you about public etiquette. Your dog needs to be unobtrusive. There's no counter surfing. There's no sniffing tables at restaurants. There's no laying in the middle of the aisle on the bus. The dogs have to be
acknowledging other. I remember actually. So a couple of years ago, because we live in the same neighborhood, we were at a Winterfest event.
Yeah.
And we ran into you, and it was funny because I remember my husband and the kids were about to go on a.
One of the bouncy things, wasn't it?
Oh, no, it was the horse and carriage rides all around downtown. Yeah. And Trapper was sitting, and I was going to stay with the dog because the dog's not going to go up on the carriage to go around downtown with the horse. And it was so funny because you could see how much we followed through on our training because he was sitting, staring at me because he's not allowed to acknowledge anyone else because I was holding the leash. And out of the corner of his eye, he was trying to acknowledge the horse, but he knew he wasn't supposed to.
Yeah.
And that's the difference is he knows he did not break his pose. He stayed focused. He knew what his job was. He knows what he's supposed to do. We get comments when we go out. Half the time when we're at a restaurant, he's a big dog. He's actually bigger than most service dogs,
yes,
Trapper.
He is. Most of our dogs are around 80 pounds, and he's over 90, I think.
Yeah.
He's kind of a big dude.
Yeah, he's a big dude.
He's got Bernese Mountain Dog in him, that's why.
Yeah, and we see it in the eyes, right? Yeah. But the thing is, for this big dog, he knows what he's supposed to do. He curls up in the tiniest little spots. Half the time when we're out at a restaurant, the server actually, if they didn't see us being seated, doesn't even know that the dog is there.
And that's exactly how it should be.
And Trapper is all black. So I'm at the point where I actually make sure I let the server know because sometimes if his nose happens to stick, I don't want them to jump when they're holding their food, that they suddenly feel something on their toe. But he doesn't get acknowledged, and we get compliments on that all the time. And I do my part in saying, this is what a service dog should be.
Well, and that's just it. It's not only the dog's behavior, but how you behave with the dog. So for us, we need to teach the dog the proper rules and respect, but we need to teach you how to enforce that. And when you see a team out in public that is self-trained, or perhaps a fake service dog who haven't educated themselves about the etiquette pieces and the protocol pieces, that's where you see dogs being, at the food court at the mall, sitting on a chair, or even worse, on top of a table. And it's like, whoa, that is behavior unbecoming of a service dog. And, I've talked to people, because we get calls from people who are training their own dog because the wait lists are closed and they're desperate. And there are people out there who are trying to do it right. And you point them in the direction of the resources that will help them be successful. But you can tell when people just want to throw a jacket on a dog and don't care, and people who want to represent the industry and do it right. And
I think that sometimes just comes from desperation, whether they mean to or not. And that's where there's the lack of education. That's why we're talking about today. So what I love about National Service Dogs is you guys actually raise your puppies right from the beginning.
Yep.
And there's a reason for that. So
talk about purpose.
Yes. So talk about that, because that's where it goes. It kind of goes back to that idea that not all dogs are meant to be working dogs. Yeah. And there's a reason that you have them from the beginning, so that you can actually see all those things and make sure that the dog is serving their purpose. So talk about from the puppy to when they actually get placed with a family.
Yeah, because that arc is important, not just so that you guys get a dog that works well for you, but that the dog, as I said earlier, is in a job that they can handle and supports their needs, because it's not just about no offense, it's not about you.
No,
it's about the dog, right? It's a holistic approach as well.
Same thing as a family. Like, we had to do our work as a family to be prepared for the dog to come into our home.
Yep.
And I will say that as a family, is it easy to take the dog with us everywhere we go? It's actually not.
No, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Do we see the difference? It's funny. I remember at the beginning, because Andy is actually, so some kids are very overt in their attachment to their dog. Andy was not that. He didn't seek out big hugs. He didn't seek out, but what we started to do is we would train him to hold the handle on the vest, and we would just say, Andy, get your dog. Andy, get your dog. And I remember at the beginning, and he would, and if he ever dropped, actually, it's very amusing to watch him. If he ever accidentally drops the handle, you should see the scramble he does to grab it again. Yeah. Because he wants Trapper. Now, he's a lot more overt in him wanting him there. But at the beginning, I remember a couple of times we're like, oh, you know what? We're just going to do this. We won't take the dog with us. It's not a big deal. Well, it was a big deal. Because actually, we noticed a massive change in Andy's behavior. He was more stressed. His anxiety was back to being higher. Mm-hmm. And that's actually how we realized, oh, he's not hugging the dog all the time, but he knows the dog's there, and the dog is his anchor, and the dog is settling him. Yeah. So now it's very rare that we're out in public without Trapper. It makes a massive difference for us. Yeah. But yeah, the dog and us, you both have to do the work, because it's a working relationship. So we'll go back to the puppies.
But back to the puppies, yeah. So bred for purpose. And of course, when we first started, we out, we had our first breeding dog donated in the fall of 96. So we actually started out pretty good. We had a golden retriever given to us, and our first litter of puppies was born in like June of 97. But we relied heavily on donated dogs, rescue dogs. And the sad reality is of those dogs coming in, only 35% of them had the right stuff to go through the program. So for all the folks out there that are doing the train your own dog thing and whatnot, what they're not prepared for is the vast majority of the dogs they're pulling out of shelters or acquiring through very good breeders, but sometimes, they're breeding dogs for a different purpose. Those dogs have a very unlikely chance, like about 35% of making it through. So that's number one. It's really hard. So for us, our success rates vary, but anywhere from 65 to 80%, depending on the year and and whatnot.
So that's interesting. Just
but
thinking
that's
about
for bred
those
for
numbers.
purpose,
Yeah,
right?
but bred for purpose, and you're still at 65 to 80%. So here you have experts, because you've been doing this for long enough, and still it's only 65 to 80% of your dogs that actually go on to have that successful role as a working dog. So, and it's just, I think that's worth noting. Okay, so you have the puppies, and the puppies go out to puppy raisers.
So, and we've evolved over the years. Actually, I'm going to do a shameless plug for our program right now, because we just actually revamped our puppy program and our breeding program, and I'm so excited. I'm a breeder caretaker for my organization, so I volunteer my time to have puppies born at my house and nurture them through that first 8 weeks of their lives. And we've put in some really cool conditioning pieces that we not done previously, or only done to a small degree. And to see puppies at 4 weeks starting their basic training, and to see how that sets them up for success. So it's not just about breeding the right dogs, it's about starting them off. Most dogs, their developmental stages, it's very short, right? So from 0 to 16 weeks and 0 to 6 months is prime learning. And if you're not doing anything with those dogs in those critical development periods, those dogs start out behind the 8 ball already. So
your goal is to get that success rate higher than 65 to 80.
We start conditioning the puppies, to be honest with you, these days under the new program, the day they're born, touching them, getting them used to touch sensitivity. Let's face it, kids with autism put their fingers everywhere. And so we want our dogs not to be body sensitive. And we actually start assessing their body sensitivity and getting them used to touch and being handled.
Well, I can tell you the
day
difference.
One.
We have 2 dogs in our house. We have a family dog who is a rescue.
Yep.
She has high anxiety. She's come very far. We kind of joke that Trapper is her support dog. Just as much as Andy.
Yep.
And then we have Trapper. And it's interesting. You see the difference. We turn the vacuum on, and Poppy, our family dog, is on high alert. And she's better now, but she is avoiding that thing like crazy. Trapper is so much ignoring it. He's out like a light, couldn't care less, that we literally have to actually wake him up and push him out of the way and say, like, buddy, I need to vacuum there. Like, you have to go. Yeah. And that's the difference very much.
And because we started getting him accustomed to those types of sounds in the whelping box, right? And we were mindful about how he was introduced to those sounds so as not to elicit a fear reaction in him over the long haul. So everything we do is purposeful. From the day the dogs are born to the day that you guys get them, everything has a purpose. And I think that's one of the big differences when you're doing it bred for purpose. It really is everything from introducing them to novel sounds, intensity of that sound, and when it comes into their developmental phase, to teaching them to sit and to lay down and just be a good canine citizen.
So at what age do the puppies then go out to puppy raisers? So you have volunteer puppy raisers.
Right now it's around 9 weeks. So part of our new protocol is we're using an internationally recognized program, a behavioral checklist. So we're actually at 8 weeks assessing the dogs using a testing mechanism that's, like I said, recognized. And all our dogs are now going into an international database. And we're putting their scores in so that we can get real-time, intense data on how our dogs are developing based on our protocols that we've put in place for their development. So they get monitored every step of the way. And they're going out these days around 9 weeks. We have puppies going out on Friday.
Amazing.
At 9 weeks
so when
to
the
their new
puppies
foster
go
homes.
out, what it is that it's volunteers in the community. And you have approximately how many volunteers?
We have 70 dogs out in the community in foster care right now.
So some of them are university students, some are adults,
families, retirees. It's an 18-month commitment, so it's not an insignificant amount of time to volunteer, and it's pretty intensive. But we do offer weekly classes for our volunteers. You can we do one-on-ones with them. There's outings. As the dogs get
I
older,
can tell
we
you
do
that
regular
every
outings.
single time that my friends anywhere see the purple jacket, which is what Trapper is, I literally get a text.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I just saw new puppies.
Yeah.
Like every time.
Well, just so you know, half the NSD staff right now live here in Brantford.
I'm aware that you're also at the Gretzky Center quite often.
We are.
I almost get a text every week.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. But
Well, they allow us to do training in there with the puppies.
Yes.
So we do classes and stuff in there. They've been very supportive of the program. And like I said, half my puppy team lives here. So Brantford is going to get inundated with more puppy jackets than ever before. But
well, and I can say as a community member, because a lot of the families, we all stay in touch with each other, even if we weren't from the same graduating class. We have I've never had an incident anywhere in the community of not being welcomed.
here in Brantford?
Here in Brantford
Oh, no,
or
it's been
actually
awesome.
anywhere. And I think that's incredible. Like, and actually anywhere we've gone, I've never had an issue. And even when people, and I don't know, it might be partly because we're very open and we're willing to talk, but even when people have had questions, they've been such interesting and respectful questions. So going back to the puppy raiser, we're actually still in touch with our puppy raisers. Not every family has to do that.
No, we take privacy pretty seriously, and not everybody's in a situation where they feel comfortable with that. That's probably the biggest challenge we have. And it's hard sometimes for the volunteers because they're so emotionally invested in the dogs after 18 months. And keeping healthy boundaries has been a theme for us for the last several years. We're actually trying to move the organization into a more trauma-informed workplace. It's an active goal for the organization over the next 2 to 3 years is to become a fully trauma-informed workplace. But also a big piece of that is creating healthy boundaries for everybody. And social media makes it difficult, and sometimes people aren't always mindful. So we always try to stress healthy communication, and how much involvement families have with our volunteers is up to them. But
well, I remember we
not
were
all
given
families are
a
able
letter
to.
from the puppy raisers. So we were presented with a letter, and it was an invitation to stay in touch, but it was our choice. We've actually we're one of the great stories. We got lucky. We have an amazing family that we're always very excited and supportive, and they love seeing. Actually, they have so much pride that Trapper is successfully a working dog.
Yeah,
and so we're very lucky with that. So then the puppies stay till they're about 18
months. Yeah, and then they come into our training center for 4 to 6 months of assessment, matching, and training to go out to the families. So they would be, we call them career changed. So they would come in, and the first month is really assessment, getting to know the dog, assessing their basics, their prey drive, their dog distraction, their squirrel distraction,
their ball distraction. That's a big thing for autism.
Yeah. And figuring out who they are and what their best career path is, and streaming them into that career path. And once we have a feel for the best fit for the dog, then we go to the wait list and say, okay, these are the clients that are coming up. Where do we see alignment? Like, is this family got a house full of cats, and which dog can handle that? And is this dog going to have to go to work with this client with PTSD or go to school with a child with autism? And just how active
So when
the
you're
family
looking
is.
at an autism service dog, what would you say are the top 3 sort of general characteristics you're looking for?
You want the dogs, like that prey drive, to be minimal because they're tethered to the kids. So from a safety perspective, they can't have their head on a swivel looking to chase squirrels, cats, balls, things like that. So we look for a dog that doesn't have that kind of intense drive. Or if they do, it's manageable. You know what I mean? Like we have, because some
Trapper's
of our
very lazy.
but
in attentive. So he's lazy in the right way. He's very much, Andy and him are at the same level as far as intensity.
Yeah.
But he's so focused on the connection. So he's lazy in the right way, if that makes sense, right? Because He will go anywhere with you. His goal is to just be with you at all times. So there's a connection there, and he's very focused on that over anything else. But he is definitely a very chill. Like, I'm not sure that he knows how to run. He saunters. But you know what?
He's a big guy too.
But
some of the smaller
Andy
dogs are a bit more
saunters,
energy.
right? When he walks. And so that's how it's really well matched. Okay, now PTS. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say on all that with the dogs, we choose dogs that we don't want to, I mean, in Trapper's case, he's a big lagoon, right? He's
a little different, yes.
Yeah. But if you get a smaller dog, they'll have a little bit more energy. But some kids need that too, because some kids get stuck in a space and they need to be nudged out of it. So it's not about having a lazy dog. It's just, you want a dog that's going to meet the child where they are. And if that is, terracing around on the playground in a moment of fun, great. But being able to turn that off and go back to work as soon as it said, that's enough, jacket on, we're back in work mode.
Oh,
and the dogs to be able to go on and off like that.
Vest on, vest off, two totally different dogs.
Mm-hmm. They call them, one of our early volunteers way back in the day called it their coats, the smart coat.
Oh my gosh.
Because the dogs become a different animal when the
we
dog
question when Trapper's vest is off. We actually question if he's a service dog sometimes because he does some really dumb stuff. But then you put the vest on.
Yeah.
And he's all in and all business. He's more coordinated when he has the vest on.
Yeah.
Okay, so PTSD dogs, what is it that you're looking for?
So for PTSD, obviously, one of the key differences between PTSD and autism for the dog side of it is our kids are nonverbal. In the moment, they don't typically command the dogs. So if say you're out for a walk and the dog turns and looks at a squirrel, you or I would look at the dog and go, don't even think about it. And the dog's like, oop, got me, and keeps on walking. Because you can provide that verbal prompt in the moment to keep the dog focused. Our kids with autism don't do that. And depending on the handler, it's not always practical. And sometimes the kids are further away from you and with their dog. So the dogs can't take advantage on the autism side because they have a nonverbal child that they're working with. So a dog that may look at a squirrel, somebody who's able-bodied or one of our veterans, big guy, whatever, can correct the dog. So that's not the dog being inappropriate, because looking at a squirrel is not going to get them into trouble. But if they're allowed to then follow through on that look and the thought process, that's when you start to have behavioral problems. So when you have a verbal, physically able adult that can direct the dog more in the moment, those dogs can be very successful for PTSD where they weren't for autism. And that's because they're better or worse. They're just different. But we need a higher drive dog too. Our PTSD service dogs are trained to do nightmare interruption is one of the across the board skills. Which means those dogs have to sleep with one eye open a little bit, right? So if their person is in crisis or having a rough night, those dogs can't just snore through it. They have to get up and respond. So we look for dogs that are intuitive as well, that constantly checking in with their handler and responding accordingly. We train the dogs to pick up on cues that they have persons under stress. So in a veteran, say in a stressful situation, they might tap their foot, tap their leg, fiddle with their hands, and you can actually train the dog to respond to those physical cues to interrupt those behaviors. And for autism, self-injurious behaviors of dogs can sometimes interrupt as well. But for people with PTSD, you want a dog that's watching for that kind of stuff. And you can train it part of the way there, but they also have to
have the instinct
to be that in tune with their handler. And the kids with autism are all over the map. Like some of the kids, as you pointed out, they hug that dog and they never let go. And other kids, as you pointed out with Andy, somebody watching them might not think he has any relationship with the dog, but he does, because if you take it away, you see a different kid. But somebody casually observing that might think he doesn't have any relationship with the dog. And the dogs need to be able to handle both the hugs and the distance too, right? And it depends on the dog.
Yeah, and people will ask me all the time, like, why does he have a service dog? What does he do? And
it's hard to quantify it.
Well, I don't know. I hope I'll give you my answer and you tell me if I'm doing okay. I say number one, it's for safety. Mm-hmm. So the difference between Andy and some kids is Andy is not a bolter. Now, definitely if he was a bolter, the service dog can really help because they can put the belt around the waist and attach it to the dog, and the dog will actually plant themselves, which allows you as the adult a little bit more time to get there and hopefully keep them from safety. That's not an issue for Andy, and actually we don't always need the belt. We do it in high traffic areas, but for Andy, he's a wanderer.
Yeah, and he's not mindful of unsafe situations.
Exactly. Yeah. So he might wander onto the street. So I explained that when he's connected to the dog is aware of that and knows that he's not allowed to be there. So it's just giving him the cue. So I say the first thing is safety. Mm-hmm. Number two, anxiety. Andy can get quite anxious, and the dog, it's not, when we always look for next steps as parents. So it was not logical that we could keep him in a stroller for the rest of his life. It wasn't logical that we would hold his hand for the rest of his life. And actually the irony is a month before you called us, National Service Dogs calls us, say that we were up for a dog, Andy started dropping my hand in public. It was crushing as a parent, but also I was super proud that he was even aware that kids his age weren't holding mom and dad's hand. But nobody thinks twice about someone walking and holding their dog. No. So then there's that. So it helps his anxiety because now he has a constant with him, whether he's at school, whether he's at home or in public. So I say anxiety and then also just confidence, right? And it allows, and the funny thing is.
And you can't put a value on that.
No. And when we're out in public, crowds will clear out of the way for the dog before they will for the person.
That's true.
And so that is really helpful. And Andy, the first time we went out, we went to Monster Trucks for lack of an event. For the first time that was the first big event we went when we had Trapper. And you know what I noticed is that, so John and Emily were walking ahead of us. Andy, Trapper, and I were following behind this big crowd. And yes, the crowd went up. But for the first time, Andy used to hold my arm like we were on a really big date. He'd be holding me so tight. Andy walked through the crowd with Trapper beside him and his chin was up.
Yeah.
And he felt confident. And that was our first experience. And I think that was only about a month after we had him. And I thought, this is why we got the dog. This is why we have him. And this is the difference.
Yeah. And every child's journey is very different. But that confidence and that anxiety, and that's going back to the beginning where we started, that's part of the reason we got into PTSD is when we were looking to expand the program and our area of work. It came back through our research that what they were doing with the PTSD service dogs is a lot of anxiety reduction. And it's like, well, wait a second. The same type of training, there's so much overlap between autism and PTSD, and anxiety is at the heart of that. So, providing light and deep pressure, disruptive nudges to keep people focused on the positive and redirect them to positive activities. Those hold true for both autism and PTSD.
Absolutely.
Assistance with sleep patterns. The kids with autism might not be having nightmares, but they still utilize the dogs.
Oh, so many kids with autism
routine, right?
Can't stay up, right? Have a lot of anxiety when it comes to bedtime.
Yep.
And stress.
So that's part of the reason we got into PTSD, because our dogs that we were breeding for purpose for autism, the crossover between the two programs, even though they're very different, are very similar. And
they're complementary.
They are. And then the canine assisted intervention program came 2 years after the PTSD program, because as we educated ourselves about post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and mental health, we were getting requests from treatment professionals to say, can we get a dog, not just for our client, can we get a dog for us to as a facility dog, and that grew out of that. So that's how we ended up with the 3 programs.
Well, Dani, I want to acknowledge you and thank you because first, you have dedicated so much of your career and your life to helping so many families. Do you know the family count yet of people?
Oh, for NSD, we're pushing 500.
Amazing.
But worldwide, I have to tell you, it is a bit surreal. I was watching, it was a long time ago, I think is it Dr. Oz or some goofy Oprah spinoff doctor? It wasn't Dr. Phil, but one of those other guys. And he was doing a whole week on autism, I think it was, and somebody had tuned us into it. And the episode I saw, there was a woman in the front row with her autism service dog out in California. And at some point in this show, he asked her about the dog and how it helps. And her answer was very similar to yours. Mm-hmm. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, hey, that's exactly what's written on our website. What she's saying, what they're doing with the dog is exactly. And I remember watching it thinking, she has no idea who we are, who I am, or that dog laying at her feet, the genesis of that took place in Cambridge, Ontario.
Not so
15 years ago.
Amazing.
It's pretty cool.
Well, I want to thank you for everything you've done for our family and what you're
welcome.
doing for other families. I think you're an incredible advocate yourself for sharing the options of what we do, and I thank you. I think we could talk for hours.
We could.
I know.
We might have to come back and do something.
I would happily have you back again. So everyone, thank you so much. And Dani, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and good luck with the project.
Friends, that's all for today. I want to sincerely thank you for listening to my podcast, Happy and Independent, Empowering Special Needs Parents. This podcast was recorded at Wilfrid Laurier's The Switch Podcast Studio. It's quickly becoming my home away from home. And I want to thank the lovely and knowledgeable Avery Moore-Kloss from Folktale Studios for her mad editing brilliance. She makes me sound good. If you haven't shared, subscribed, or reviewed my podcast yet, please do so. I promise I read every single one. And the more you share and subscribe, the farther my mission goes to change the world, one confident advocate at a time. See you next week.